The way she clutched that serving tray should have been just another detail Bak Sung-chul ignored, another nervous gesture from an anxious waitress working the evening shift at the lounge he'd claimed as neutral territory. But when Lee Hae-in's shoulders drew inward at Danny Russo's whispered comment, something cold and territorial crystallized in his chest. He'd eliminated entire operations for less than the disrespect he saw playing out 3 tables away. "Come on, sweetheart, just one drink after your shift." Danny's hand drifted toward her wrist, fingers already closing. Hae-in's smile never reached her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't. Maybe another server could." Sung-chul's glass stopped halfway to his lips. That small apology, that reflexive deference to a man who deserved none, triggered something in him that had nothing to do with the criminal empire he'd carved from Seoul to Los Angeles. For the first time in 12 years of ruling the Korean underworld with surgical precision, Bak Sung-chul felt the careful control he prided himself on begin to slip. The moment Danny's fingers made contact, Sung-chul was already rising from his booth. Hae-in had served the man in the quarter booth for 4 months without ever really looking at him. He was a presence, tailored shirts, understated watches, the kind of stillness that suggested coiled violence just beneath an expensive surface. She knew the essential things. He always sat facing the door, tipped in cash that she desperately needed, and preferred to be left alone with his whiskey and his silence. Being left alone was something Hae-in understood intimately. 26 years of being overlooked had taught her how to navigate spaces without making waves. She softened her voice with difficult customers, made herself smaller when men like Danny crowded too close, perfected the exhausting art of being helpful without being noticed. The lounge's dim lighting helped, the late shift helped more. Most nights, she could finish her tables, collect her tips, and disappear into the city before anyone remembered her name. But tonight, Danny Russo had remembered, and the man in the corner booth had been watching the entire time. Hae-in had learned to hum without making sound. It was a trick she'd developed in middle school when the world felt too loud and her body felt too visible. A silent melody that lived only in her throat, vibrating just enough to ground her when everything else tilted sideways. Tonight, as Danny Russo leaned across the bar with that predatory smile stretching his face, she hummed the opening bars of her grandmother's favorite hymn. "You're even prettier when you're nervous," Danny said, his voice carrying just far enough for his friends to hear and laugh. "That shy thing you do, it's really working for me." Hae-in's fingers tightened around the neck of the wine bottle she was holding. "You're Macallan 18, sir. Can I get you anything else?" "Yeah." His eyes dragged down her uniform in a way that made her skin crawl. "Your number. Or better yet, just tell me when you get off. I'll wait." From his corner booth, Sung-chul watched her throat work as she swallowed, watched the barely perceptible movement of her lips as she did that thing she always did, humming something he couldn't hear but could somehow feel in the tension of her shoulders. He'd noticed it the first week she started working here, that silent song she retreated into when the world pressed too close. 4 months of watching had taught her her patterns, the way she served tables in a specific order to minimize the time spent near certain customers, how she kept her hair pinned in a way that created a curtain between her face and wandering eyes. The fact that she always worked the Friday late shift, even though it meant dealing with men like Danny Russo, because Friday tips paid for her grandmother's medications. Sung-chul knew things about Lee Hae-in that she'd never told him. He'd made it his business to know. "I really can't, sir." Her voice stayed professional, but Sung-chul caught the tremor underneath. "If there's nothing else." "There's definitely something else." Danny's hand shot out, not quite touching, but blocking her path. "See, I've been coming here for 3 months now, and you keep playing hard to get. It's starting to hurt my feelings." One of his friends laughed. "Maybe she needs a bigger tip, Danny." "Maybe she needs to learn some manners," Danny countered, his tone shifting from playful to sharp. "I'm being nice here, asking politely. Some girls don't appreciate when a guy's being respectful." Hae-in's humming stopped. Sung-chul set down his glass with deliberate care. The crystal made no sound against the mahogany table, but something in the air changed. His lieutenant, Min Ho, who'd been standing near the entrance, straightened immediately. Danny didn't notice. He was too busy backing Hae-in toward the service station, too confident in his own untouchability to sense the predator rising from the shadows. "So, what do you say? Just one drink? I promise I'll be a perfect gentleman." Sung-chul stood, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Danny's hand closed around Hae-in's wrist. Not aggressively, that was the worst part. He grabbed her with the casual entitlement of a man who'd never been told no in a way that mattered, his thumb pressing into the pulse point where her heartbeat hammered against her skin. "Come on, don't be like that." The wine bottle slipped from Hae-in's other hand. The crash of glass against tile cut through the lounge's ambient music like a gunshot. Dark liquid spread across the floor in a pool that looked too much like blood under the dim lighting. "Shit!" Danny jerked back, wine splattered across his expensive shoes. "You stupid! Is there a problem here?" The voice came from directly behind Danny, so quiet it was almost a whisper. But it carried the kind of weight that made everyone within earshot stop moving. The bartender froze mid-pour. Conversations died at nearby tables. Even the music seemed to lower in deference. Danny turned, annoyance already shaping his features. "Yeah, actually, this clumsy bitch just—" He didn't finish the sentence. Sung-chul stood less than a foot away, close enough that Danny had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. There was nothing aggressive in his posture. His hands stayed loose at his sides. His expression remained perfectly neutral. But something in his absolute stillness radiated a violence so controlled it was almost beautiful. "Apologize to her," Sung-chul said. Danny blinked. "What?" "You grabbed her. She dropped the bottle because you grabbed her." Sung-chul's tone never changed, never rose above that deadly calm. "So, you're going to apologize, and then you're going to leave." For 3 seconds, Danny's brain seemed to process that he was being challenged. His friends shifted in their seats, uncertain whether to laugh or run. Danny's face flushed red as his hands curled into fists. "Do you know who my father is?" "No." Sung-chul tilted his head slightly, and something flickered in his eyes that made Danny take an involuntary step back. "Do you know who I am?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Min Ho moved from the entrance to a position that casually blocked the door. 2 other men Hae-in had never noticed before materialized from the shadows with flanking Danny's friends with the synchronized precision of a choreographed dance. Danny's bravado cracked. His eyes darted around the room, finally registering the stillness, the way everyone had stopped pretending not to watch, the way the manager had disappeared into the back office without a word. She's fine. It was just—" "You have 10 seconds, Sung-chul interrupted, his voice dropping even lower, "to apologize to Miss Lee. After that, we have a very different conversation outside." Hae-in stood frozen behind them both, her wrist already darkening where Danny's fingers had pressed. She'd never heard Sung-chul speak before tonight, never knew he knew her name. Danny left before the 10 seconds elapsed, practically dragging his friends toward the exit with mumbled apologies that never quite reached Hae-in's ears. The lounge slowly exhaled, conversations resuming in careful increments, as if everyone was testing whether it was safe to breathe again. Hae-in dropped to her knees and started collecting broken glass with shaking hands. "Stop." Sung-chul's voice, still quiet but no longer weaponized, came from somewhere above her. "You'll cut yourself." "It's my job," she whispered, not looking up. "I broke it. I have to." "Min-ho." Sung-chul didn't raise his voice, but a man appeared instantly with a dustpan and brush. "Take care of this, and tell Manager Kim that Miss Lee is leaving early tonight, with full pay." "Yes, sir." Hae-in finally looked up, confusion breaking through her fear. "I can't leave. My shift doesn't end until 2 a.m., I know." Sung-chul extended his hand to help her stand. When she hesitated, something almost gentle crossed his features. "Your shift is over, Miss Lee. I'm walking you home. It wasn't a question. 20 minutes later, Hye-in found herself on the street outside her apartment building in Silver Lake, with no clear memory of how she'd gotten there. Sung-chol's car, something expensive and black that had appeared at the lounge's service entrance, idled at the curb while his driver waited with inhuman patience. "How do you know where I live?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "I know you take 2 buses to get to work," Sung-chol said, his hands in his pockets, his posture deliberately non-threatening. "I know you work 4 jobs to pay for your grandmother's dialysis treatments. I know you've been at the lounge for 4 months, and in that time, Danny Russo has harassed you 17 times. Hye-in's breath caught. "You've been counting?" "I've been watching." He said it without apology, as if surveillance was simply a fact of his existence. "The managers won't protect you. They're afraid of Danny's family, who owns 3 restaurants in this district and has enough political connections to make problems disappear. And you're not afraid of them." It wasn't a question, but Sung-chol answered anyway. "No." Hye-in wrapped her arms around herself, the November air suddenly colder. "What do you want from me?" The question clearly surprised him. For the first time since she'd known him, if 4 months of silent observation counted as knowing him, his carefully controlled expression shifted into something almost vulnerable. "I want you to stop humming that hymn like it's the only thing keeping you standing. I want you to serve drinks without calculating which tables are safest. I want you to stop making yourself invisible because you think it's the only way to survive. You don't even know me. I know you haven't missed a shift in 4 months, even when your grandmother was hospitalized. I know enough." The invitation arrived 3 days later, delivered by Min-ho during Hae-in's shift at the coffee shop where she worked mornings. A cream-colored card with an address in Koreatown and a single line in elegant script. "Dinner. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., please." The please felt significant, like a concession from a man who didn't make them often. Hae-in almost didn't go. She'd spent 3 days trying to convince herself that Sung-chol's protection was a debt she couldn't afford to repay, that men like him didn't do favors without expecting something in return. But curiosity, or maybe something more dangerous, won out. The address led to a restaurant with no sign, tucked between a karaoke bar and a grocery store specializing in imported Korean goods. The front windows were covered with rice paper screens that glowed warm against the evening dark. Hae-in checked the card twice before gathering the courage to knock. Sung-chol answered the door himself. He looked different without the armor of expensive suits and corner booth shadows. Still dangerous, that would never change, but somehow softer in casual black clothing, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. Behind him, the restaurant was empty except for candles burning on a single table near the window. "You came," he said, and she heard relief underneath the words. "You said please." Something like a smile ghosted across his face. Min-ho said that was important, that I should ask, not command. He stepped aside, gesturing her in. "This is my grandmother's restaurant. Was, I should say. She died 6 years ago, but I've kept it exactly as she left it." Hae-in stepped into a space that felt like stepping back in time. Traditional Korean artwork lined the walls. Wooden tables bore the marks of decades of use. The air smelled like gochujang and sesame oil and something else, memory maybe, or love preserved in the absence of the person who'd created it. "I don't let many people come here," Sung-chol continued, leading her to the table. "The location isn't secret, but the door stays locked. This is mine in a way nothing else is." "Why show me?" He pulled out her chair, waited until she sat before taking his own seat across from her. "Because you think you know what I am. Crime boss, killer, monster in an expensive suit." His eyes found hers, dark and intent. "You're not wrong, but my grandmother used to say that a man is the sum of all his parts, not just the sharpest edges." The food appeared, delivered by an elderly woman who smiled at Sung-chol with the fond exasperation of someone who'd known him as a boy. Japchae and kimchi and galbi that fell off the bone, each dish placed with care that spoke of ritual, of tradition, of a world where violence and tenderness somehow coexisted. She was the only person who was never afraid of me, Sung-chol said quietly, watching Hae-in taste the japchae, even after she learned what I'd become. The phone call came at 6 in the morning, 2 days after the dinner. Manager Kim's voice was apologetic, but final. "I'm sorry, Hae-in. The owners made the decision. Your last paycheck will be mailed." "I don't understand." Hae-in sat up in bed, her grandmother still sleeping in the next room. "Did I do something wrong?" A long pause. "The Russo family made some calls. They have relationships with our ownership group. There's nothing I can do." The line went dead. By noon, Hae-in had lost 2 more jobs. The coffee shop claimed they were restructuring staff. The dry cleaner said they'd found someone with more availability. Both managers couldn't meet her eyes when they delivered the news. Both mentioned, carefully, that perhaps she should look for work outside the neighborhood. By evening, she was standing in her grandmother's hospital room. The woman had been admitted again yesterday, staring at the itemized bill on the bedside table. $3,000 for this week alone. More coming. Always more coming. "Hannah?" Her grandmother's voice was paper-thin. "Why are you crying?" "I'm not, Helmione," but her hands were shaking as she folded the bill and tucked it into her purse. "Just tired." She made it to the parking garage before the panic truly hit. Her simple life, the one she'd carefully constructed from 4 jobs and careful invisibility and the desperate mathematics of survival, was collapsing. Danny Russo's family hadn't just gotten her fired, they'd blacklisted her, made her untouchable in every establishment that depended on their goodwill or feared their influence. She'd lost everything in less than 12 hours, and for what? Because a monster had decided to notice her? Because another monster had decided to protect her? Hae-in leaned against her grandmother's ancient Honda and let herself break down where no one could see. The parking garage smelled like oil and exhaust, and the particular desperation of people who lived one emergency away from catastrophe. She belonged here, had always belonged in spaces like this, dark, overlooked, barely surviving. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I heard what happened. Let me fix this." She didn't need to ask who it was. Another text followed immediately. "Please, I can fix this." Hae-in stared at the words until they blurred. Sung-chol could fix it. She knew that with a certainty that felt like vertigo. He'd said he spoke the language her enemies understood, and she'd seen the proof in how quickly Danny Russo had crumbled. One word from Baek Sung-chol and her jobs would reappear, the blacklist would dissolve, her simple life would be handed back to her. But at what cost? What did it mean to let a man like that into her life, not as a silent observer, but as an active participant in her survival? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before she finally typed, "How?" Sung-chol arrived at the hospital parking garage within 20 minutes, which meant he'd already been close. Watching, probably. The thought should have frightened Hae-in more than it did. He found her still leaning against the Honda, her face blotchy from crying she couldn't quite stop. For a moment, he simply stood there, his hands curling and uncurling at his sides as if restraining the impulse to reach for her. The Russo family operates 3 restaurants, 2 dry cleaners, and owns partial stakes in 5 other businesses in a 4-mile radius, he said quietly. They've been using those stakes as leverage for years. Protection money dressed up as consulting fees. Influence peddled through business licenses and health inspections. Hae-in wiped her eyes. "I know what they are. That's why no one will hire me." "They speak a language, Miss Lee. The language of fear and favors and just enough legitimacy to avoid federal attention." Sung-chol moved closer, his voice dropping to that deadly calm she'd heard in the lounge. "I speak that language fluently, but I also speak dialects they've never encountered." "I don't want anyone hurt." "I know." Something softened in his expression. "That's why I'm telling you this instead of simply handling it. You deserve to understand what happens next." A black car pulled up to the garage entrance, Min-ho at the wheel. Sung-chol gestured toward it, a silent invitation. Hayin hesitated for only a moment before following him inside. The car drove them to a building in downtown Los Angeles, all glass and steel and the kind of corporate anonymity that suggested serious money. Sung-chul led her to a conference room on the 40th floor, where two men in expensive suits were already waiting, their faces pale despite their tans. "Gentlemen," Sung-chul said, not bothering with introductions, "this is Miss Lee Hayin, the woman your associate, the Russo family, has blacklisted across 5 establishments." The men exchanged glances. The older one cleared his throat. "Mr. Beck, we appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but our relationship with the Russos is terminated as of today." Sung-chul sat down, gestured for Hayin to do the same. "You'll remove their influence from every business decision. You'll personally ensure Miss Lee is reinstated with back pay and a formal apology. And you'll make it clear to Danny Russo that if he speaks her name again, he's speaking to me." "That's not, we can't just—" Sung-chul slid a folder across the table. "Tax discrepancies, OSHA violations, immigration paperwork for your restaurant staff that won't hold up under scrutiny. The Russos have been sloppy, and you've been complicit." He leaned back, his tone never rising above conversational. "Or we can discuss how your pension fund has been routing investments through my legitimate holdings for the past 3 years. Your choice." The silence stretched like wire pulled too tight. "We'll handle it," the older man finally said. Sung-chul stood, offering his hand to Hayin. "See? Just a conversation." The jobs came back within 48 hours. Manager Kim called personally, stumbling over an apology that mentioned miscommunication and administrative error without once acknowledging the truth they both knew. The coffee shop, the dry cleaners, even a raise she hadn't asked for, delivered with the nervous energy of people who'd just learned what it meant to be on the wrong side of Baek Sung-chul's attention. Hayin should have felt relief, gratitude. Instead, she felt the weight of a debt she couldn't calculate, growing heavier with each passing day. She stopped answering Sung-chul's calls. It took him 3 days to appear at her door. Midnight, her grandmother finally asleep after another difficult dialysis session. Hayin opened the door to find him standing in the hallway of her apartment building, looking exhausted in a way that suggested the weariness went deeper than lack of sleep. "Why are you avoiding me?" No preamble, no pretense. Hayin kept her hands on the doorframe, blocking entry. "Because I'm not stupid." "I never thought you were." "Then you know why this has to stop." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "You fixed everything. I'm grateful, but I can't. We can't." "Can't what?" He stepped closer, and she saw the desperation underneath his control. "Can't let me care about you? Can't acknowledge that something exists between us?" "You terrify me." The words came out in a rush. "Not because of what you did to Danny or those men in suits, because of what you are, the enemies you have, the violence that follows you like a shadow." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I've spent my whole life trying to be invisible, and you're asking me to stand in the brightest, most dangerous spotlight imaginable." "I would never let anything happen to you." "You can't promise that." Hayin's eyes filled with tears. "You can't control everything, no matter how powerful you are. Someone will come for you eventually. Someone always does. And when they do, they'll use me. They'll use my grandmother. We'll become weapons pointed at your heart." Sung-chul's jaw tightened. "So you'd rather go back to humming in the dark, letting men like Danny make you small?" "At least I'd be alive." The cruelty of it hung between them. "At least my grandmother would be safe." Safe. He said the word like it tasted bitter. "You think you're safe now? You think invisibility protected you before I intervened?" His hand came up, almost touching her face before he caught himself. "You were drowning, Hayin. Slowly, quietly, but drowning all the same." "Maybe." She stepped back, putting distance between them. But it was my drowning, my choice. This, what you're offering, it's beautiful and terrifying, and I can't. Her voice broke completely. Please don't make me. Sung Chol stood there for a long moment, something crumbling behind his eyes. Then he nodded once and walked away. The knock came at 2 in the morning, 6 days after she'd sent him away. Hain knew it was him before she opened the door, knew it in the careful rhythm of the knock, in the way her heart stuttered in recognition. Sung Chol looked wrecked. His shirt was untucked, missing a button. Blood stained his knuckles, not his own, she suspected. His hair fell across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more human, stripped of the careful control that usually defined him. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, raw, devastated, barely holding something back. I tried, he said without greeting. I tried to stay away, to let you have your invisible life back. Hain's hand tightened on the doorframe. Sung Chol! 6 days. His voice fractured around the edges. 6 days of watching my world continue exactly as it always has. Violence and deals and men who speak only in threats and money. 6 days of remembering that I built an empire on blood and fear and the kind of choices that don't wash off. He took a step closer and she saw his hands shaking. And all I could think about was the way you hum when you're scared, the way you apologize for taking up space, the way you looked at my grandmother's restaurant like it was a church. You're not making this easier. Good, because it shouldn't be easy. He ran his hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically uncertain. You said I can't promise to keep you safe. You're right. I can promise I'll die trying, but you're right. Someone could use you to hurt me. Someone could see what you are and try to take it away. Then why are you here? Because you're the only real thing in my life. The words came out fierce, almost angry. Everything else is performance, strategy, the face I show to allies and enemies and everyone in between. But when I'm with you, I'm just... He stopped, searching for words that clearly didn't come easy. I'm just a man who wants to make you feel safe, who wants to hear you hum because you're happy instead of terrified. Hain's hand tightened on the doorframe. I'm so scared. I know. He stayed where he was, not reaching for her, even though she could see the effort it cost him. I'm scared too. For the first time in 15 years, I'm terrified because losing you would destroy something I didn't know I still had. What? Hope. The word hung between them like a prayer. The belief that I could be more than what I've made myself, that someone could see all of me, the violence, the darkness, the blood, and still choose to stay. Hain's grandmother's voice drifted from the bedroom, asking who was at the door. The sound of her, fragile, dependent, the reason for every choice Hain had made, should have been a reminder of why this was impossible. Instead, it reminded her why it mattered. Hae-in returned to the lounge 3 weeks later, and everything had changed. Not the space itself. The dim lighting still cast shadows across mahogany tables, the same ambient music still played, the same expensive bottles lined the bar. But the air felt different, charged, as if the room itself had recalibrated around a new truth. She walked through the entrance with her shoulders back, her hair pulled away from her face instead of hiding behind it. Sung Chol's driver had offered to escort her inside, but she declined. This entrance she needed to make alone. The hostess greeted her with a deference that felt both foreign and right. Miss Lee, your usual station? Please. Conversations didn't stop when she passed, but eyes followed, respectful, curious, aware. Danny Russo's booth sat empty, would always sit empty now, she'd been told. The Russo family had quietly sold their stakes in the neighborhood businesses and relocated their operations to the valley. No violence, no drama. Just the swift, silent dissolution that happened when someone crossed the line with the wrong person. Manager Kim approached as Hae-in tied her apron. It's good to have you back. I'm sorry for... It's done. She cut him off gently. We don't need to revisit it. He nodded, relief evident in his posture, and retreated to the safety of his office. The corner booth remained empty until 8 o'clock, when Sung Chul arrived with Minho and 2 other men she now recognized as his inner circle. He caught her eye across the room, and something passed between them. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement, a promise kept. She served his table last, deliberately, savoring the anticipation. When she finally approached with his usual Macallan 18, he was alone, the others having mysteriously found business elsewhere. "Miss Lee," his voice carried that particular warmth he reserved only for her. "Mr. Back." She set down the glass, let her fingers brush his deliberately. "The usual?" "Always." His eyes held hers. "Though I find my tastes have evolved recently. I've developed a preference for things that are rare, precious, worth protecting." A customer at the next table glanced over, then quickly away. Everyone knew now, knew what it meant that Baek Sung Chol's attention had settled on the quiet waitress who used to hum to herself when she was scared. Hei Yen leaned down, close enough that only he could hear. "I'm humming right now." "I know." His hand found hers on the table, a public claim that would be reported throughout the organization by morning. But this time, it's different. "How?" "You're not trying to disappear." His thumb traced her pulse point where her heartbeat no longer hammered with fear. "You're choosing to be seen." She was. Standing in the spotlight she'd spent 26 years avoiding, terrified and exhilarated, and finally, perfectly visible. Not as a target or a victim or an invisible girl trying to survive, but as a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only honest one. "Stay with me tonight," Sung Chul said quietly, "after your shift. Not at my penthouse or your apartment. Somewhere new, somewhere that's just ours." Hei Yin smiled, a real smile, unguarded and luminous. "I get off it too." "I know." His expression softened into something that looked almost like peace. "I'll be waiting." And for the first time in her life, being known didn't feel like drowning. It felt like coming home.